The House Committee on Energy will come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Wenzel.
Here.
Representatives Preston.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
Bagol.
Here.
DeVore. Schmaltz.
Here.
Thompson. Fairbairn.
Here.
Frisbie.
Here.
Linting. Tate.
Here.
Brixey. Liberati.
Here.
Andrews.
Here.
Kofia.
Here.
Hersberg.
Here.
Myers Phillips. Here. Madam Chair, you have 13 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Rep. Preston moves to adopt the minutes from our April 22nd meeting. Seeing no objections, the minutes are approved. All right, this morning we're going to start off by taking testimony on a pair of bills, followed by a presentation. But first up, we'll have House Bill 4361. Representative Phil Green, please come up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate you all taking the time to review this bill. This bill amends the act that created our Public Service Commission. And so it is a very, 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 very large act. We're focusing in on one portion of it, which would be Section 10P. And then we look down at subsection, however you want to say it, 9, and it says any standards or rules developed under this section must be designed to do the following. So the Public Service Commission is allowed to do the following things. We added Section F to allow utilities to do any of the following. So allowing the utilities to trim the trees from the ground to the sky to save costs and ensure transmission or distribution line reliability, and then to maintain all vegetation for up to 15 feet from the outermost portion of the wire that conducts electricity, which is the right-of-way there. Growing up in the Thumb, living in the Thumb, representing the Thumb, we had a lot of issues with grid reliability. And as I talked with individuals, and you'll hear from our electric co-op here shortly, as I talked with individuals, the question was what's going on? And consistently it was dead branches, trees falling over, taking out the line. So as we know, most schools get a certain number of days off. Many times, my school that I was the administrator of would have those for no power days. We'd have 6 no power days a year because trees would fall over on the power lines or branches would fall. And so as we began looking at this, we started to see a pattern of how the Public Service Commission prescribed that once it gets a certain height, you'll hear about that, once it gets a certain height, then the trees had to grow over the top of the lines. You add in emerald ash borer, pine beetle, and now oak wilt, and you have branches that are falling, taking out our public service lines. That being the case, things became really real this last late winter up in northern Michigan, as a lot of branches began snapping under the pressure and weight of the ice over the top of the lines and taking out power lines there as well. So that is the impetus for this bill, and that is the purpose. Again, it would be clear from the ground to the sky, right straight up at 15 feet from the outermost section of the power line.
Thank you. Any questions, committee members? Wow, great job. Thanks for leaving your committee and being here. Next up, we have, let's see, Kevin Mazur from Thumb Electric. Please come up whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Mazur. I'm the legal and compliance engineer for Thumb Electric Cooperative. Very aptly named, we're an electric cooperative located in the Thumb of Michigan. I would like to thank you guys for giving me the time to speak this morning. I'd like to thank Representative Green for inviting me and Chair Wenzel for opening the floor for me. Now, our goal here is to discuss some vegetation management goals, and we would like to promote administrative efficiency for our tree trimming programs by codifying what we feel is already industry best practices. At the end of the day, our goal is to provide safe, reliable, and affordable power, and vegetation management is a big part of that. The first aspect is public safety. As Representative Green mentioned, we had a generational ice storm in northern Michigan. The largest issue we had was ice accumulating on the branches, falling on lines, knocking out power, blocking roads. A lot of the restoration time involved with repairing that system was getting rid of the trees that fell on the system in the first place. Now, the best way to prevent that is to trim trees so it doesn't happen to begin with. It's a smaller risk here in Michigan, but fire risk is also a very concerning thing when it comes to trees falling on power lines. It's very easy for a dead branch to catch fire on energized lines, and it's a very risky proposition for homeowners, especially because the service drop goes right to their house. Now, the next aspect we'd like to talk about is reliability. As Representative Green mentioned before, reliability is a major issue here. Michigan consistently ranks poorly in system average interruptions, customer average interruptions, and restoration times. A lot of this is due to our large paths of forested areas that power lines cross on. For example, at Thumb Electric Cooperative, we have 12,000 members and over 2,000 miles of power lines. Quick math says that's roughly 6 members per mile of power line. If you think about how many people are in this room, that would be tens of miles of people that we'd have in our system. Realistically, what this is means we have fewer crews for a larger area. The more proactive we are trimming trees, the less outages we have, and the quicker we can restore the ones that do occur. Now, the last one goes hand in hand. It's cost efficiency. Much like operating a vehicle, it is much cheaper to change your oil and rotate your tires than it is to replace an engine and replace your tires every time they go bad. The longer we have cycles of vegetation management, the lower outages we have, the less time we spend in a storm situation. It's a lot cheaper to pay straight time than overtime. It's a lot more practical to have crews available Monday through Friday during the week than it is on a Saturday night when the wind blows. Now, these three things, safety, reliability, and affordability, all go hand in hand with our regulatory compliance that we have to have. As a co-op, we have to have different vegetation management standards from both the federal and the state government. We have to comply with the National Electric Safety Code, the Michigan Public Service Commission, and any other 3 to 4 letter agencies that you guys can think of. Tree trimming is our most cited corrective action for our worst performing circuits. So when we submit our data and say, here's what we're doing poorly, the biggest solution that we have to offer is a more robust tree trimming program. And the last part we have is the community engagement, and this is where the House bill comes in. When we do vegetation management, we spend a lot of time educating our members, educating the landowners on why this is important. But really, the standards that we have in place right now use words like reliable, safe, practicable. We in the industry have determined that to be roughly 15 feet that we need to perform things like safety and reliability. Now, when we're educating landowners and households and et cetera, when they see reasonable, their interpretation might be much different than ours. So having the state of Michigan agree with us and saying this is the best solution moving forward, that would help us day to day at the co-op, and that would help us reduce cost, promote reliability, promote safety. This is starting to become an issue in other states. For example, California has a regulation that they can't have anywhere closer than 18 inches the tree from the line. Well, if a tree grows, say 3 feet a year, and your cycle of vegetation management is 5 years per circuit, you get 15 feet. So depending on their cycles, they will trim back accordingly. And what we would like to do here in Michigan is promote that same thing. Thank you everybody for their time. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Representative Begole has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if you know the answer to this. Who actually makes the decision on the tree gets trimmed, the tree gets removed? What's the homeowner has any say in this at all?
Yes, it's a very interactive process. So we, outside self of the co-op, will go out there first, explain, hey, this is our lines, this is our program. Our contractor will then go out there next to mark the appropriate trees. It's a very complex system of a spray paint can and an X on the trees that would like to get removed. The homeowner signs an agreement, and then we go through. It's wildly different homeowner to homeowner. Some of them want us to clear cut their whole property if we allow them to. Other words, don't want to take us an inch. So what this does is gives us a standard for everybody that we can go to each homeowner and say, this is what we're doing and why and how far we need.
So who has the ultimate say?
The ultimate say right now is a big gray area, and that's what we're trying to determine. Since our system is so old, we operate on a lot of prescriptive easements that we have for our power lines, and those tend to fall back to the standard, which is reliable, safe, practicable, without any hard data. The easements we do have say 30 feet, which are 15 feet from each side of the conductor.
If I could, Madam Chair, one more question. Compensation? Is there any compensation for the homeowners that are going to have these trees removed, or how's that work?
Oftentimes there's not. We're a nonprofit cooperative, so every time we give compensation to one of our members, we're essentially taking it from the pockets of their neighbors. A lot of times, if there is sort of compensation, it involves planting new trees in a different location that will not interfere with the power lines.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Brixey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So how would, if this is enacted, how would the rules that get promulgated as a result be different than what the current rules are?
I would expect not much change at all. It just gives us another tool for education more than anything. To be able to point to a statute that says the state of Michigan agrees that 15 feet is a good standard to have, it allows us to kind of ease tensions with members when it comes to certain aspects of the tree trimming program.
So what does it say currently?
Currently, there is no actual standard. It's just safe, reliable, very vague.
Chair recognizes Representative Preston.
Thank you, Chair. Great bill. Glad to support it. Long overdue, I think. Trees and squirrels, two of the biggest things that we deal with. Are you advocating at all for a vegetation management cycle? NRECA has got like a 5-year cycle that they're looking to go towards. I mean, is there thought of integrating something like that into this package to try to advocate for an aggressive cycle that keeps that 15-foot right-of-way cleared?
Realistically, the best thing for our vegetation cycles is to enact the 15 feet, because if we can push it back to the problem areas that we have trouble working with the homeowners, then we need to go there less frequently, and it kind of corrects itself.
All right. Well, thank you. We all know how important tree trimming is, and it's a key component to grid reliability, which we talk a lot about on this committee. I once had a friend visit me. I live pretty rurally, and we have a lot of tree trimming going on around our power lines, a lot of trees, thankfully. And she said to me, "Oh my gosh, she was from a bigger city. She said, how do you get the trees to grow around the lines like that?" And so maybe that's what we need. Maybe that's going to fix it all, is to figure out how to get trees to grow around the lines. But until then, tree trimming is very important, and we thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we're bringing up House Bills 4486, sponsored by our very own committee member, Representative Frisbie. Representative, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Wenzel and members of the House Energy Committee, for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today about my legislation, House Bill 4486. What this legislation will accomplish is prohibiting local ordinance and policies from restricting the use of natural gas appliances. Provisions in future ordinances, resolutions, or policies adopted on or after this date of the Act will become void and unenforceable. The reason I come before you today is that throughout both this nation and our state, we've seen attempts to ban natural gas connections and appliances in new homes. I cannot emphasize enough how short-sighted this line of thinking can be. Shelving natural gas infrastructure adds unnecessary cost and negatively affects Michigan citizens. On top of benefits natural gas provides, in comparison to electricity, is cost savings. The U.S. Department of Energy has determined that natural gas costs are 3.4 more affordable times, or 3.4 times more affordable than electricity, leading to an annual energy bill for gas homes being 49% lower than all electric home energy bills. Additionally, the Department of Energy analysis found that natural gas homes reach 11% lower emissions than homes with a combination of electricity and other resources. Finally, this legislation is a reflection of personal freedoms. Who are we to tell a family how they can keep their families warm following an ice storm? Who are we to dictate how they should spend more money for more ineffective results. It's our job to make life safer and cheaper for our friends and neighbors, and this legislation provides that. I think a perfect example is about 2 weeks ago, I had a tornado go through our neighborhood about 400 yards from my house. 4 days without electricity in the neighborhood, the entire neighborhood. If this had been January, people would have been in serious trouble keeping themselves warm. However, my natural gas household generator fired up on cue and ran the whole time. It's that option of, and by the way, those occurrences in Michigan are large. Electrical outages are common, trees, squirrels, and natural disasters like ice, wind, and tornadoes. I've never, in one time in my entire public safety career, I saw a gas grid shut off. One time. And that was the result of a bad maintenance where they crossed a high pressure and a low pressure line and started having problems in a home. So it's very rare that you see gas shut off, and the availability to heat or cool their home is missed as a result. So I think natural gas is a great way to go, and I would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Minority Vice Chair Tate has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rep. Today, just question that I have there been any municipalities in Michigan that have banned natural gas?
Ann Arbor has considered it in new builds that would prevent any new build home to hook up to natural gas.
Okay. So none at this time. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Fairburn. No question. Then Representative Brixey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rep, how do you kind of do your delicate balancing act with local control, where, you know, we have strong local control here in Michigan, and our communities are very different and diverse, and they like it. So,
Yep.
what do you think about local control?
I believe in local control. I also believe that local control shouldn't constrain citizens from choice when choices of good choices to be made. We're not talking about a law that's about safety. We're talking about a law that is about choice in the way that a family decides to heat or cool their home. And I think that's where local control is an overreach, and it's a delicate balance.
So you think that it's okay then for us to override local control as it relates to energy?
I think it's okay for us to prevent them from overriding people's desire to make a choice at the local level, especially when it already is in existence.
Chair recognizes Myers Phillips.
I want to follow up on that with a comment and a question, Representative, and thank you for your testimony. I too am having trouble reconciling this with local control. I think back to a couple of weeks ago when we had the issue of solar siting here, and so much strong testimony
Right.
and support for local control to govern these issues.
Yep.
And now before the committee, we have a preemption of the possibility that a city might enact this ordinance. So I do find that problematic and want to hear more about when does local control apply? What use is it? What power does it have? Because I do see these as very interesting contradictions.
Well-
And then you can answer that, and I have another question.
Okay, so again, I think it comes down to what's in existence already and what people are using, and there is no negative benefit to using natural gas. As it's stated, the Department of Energy said a home that uses a combination of natural gas and electric produces 11% less emissions as a result. In today's energy world of HVAC units, you have 97, 98% efficient units that are put in place, so they're using less gas, but it's all about cost. So when you say at a local control, I'm going to enact a policy that's going to drive your cost up and we don't care, I think that's where you've crossed the line. When local control is about the community agrees with a assessment of, first it starts with, we'll go back to solar and wind. It's all about personal property rights for me in saying the person owns that property, and if it fits within the zoning, desired zoning of the community, then they should be able to do it, or not. So when you start to make all of these personal choices for people, if you built a home in Ann Arbor when they were considering this, and you only had the ability to do, you had a natural gas line in front of your home, but you couldn't tap it because government said you don't need it, we don't want you to have it. It's okay for your neighbors to have it, but you can't have it. I find that to be a line that's crossed in local control that is beyond in an overreach.
Well, I do appreciate your answer. I would respectfully disagree. I believe local control is the way that we have traditionally looked at it, is that if there aren't powers that are specifically reserved to the state, then that belongs in the local jurisdiction. I believe that is the way we traditionally looked at it, and not narrow local control down to the issue of cost. But with the issue of choice, it seems like I just did some quick Googling on the way up here, and it seems like more consumers are choosing to purchase electric stoves. And in Michigan, approximately 55% of our consumers have electric stoves. And nationally, it seems to be trending closer to 70%. So if a community wants to do that, and the trend is going towards electric stoves over gas stoves over time, then are we imposing our choice upon municipalities and consumers who want to go in the direction of having the stove?
Sure.
And then the last thing is, I believe the ordinance that you referenced that hasn't been enacted would apply to new construction. So
Right.
would there be any real loss in cost? If you're purchasing a home, you know what you're buying into, and if that's what you want to buy into, what's the problem with that?
Well, I think you answered the question for me, and it was choice, right? And if you're building a new home in some place that wants to put this in place, you now have no choice. I think you also have to come back to base load energy in Michigan. And while some people may be making a choice to electricity, I wouldn't. I personally would not. I would stay with gas. And the reason is cost and efficiency. So let people make that choice, not government for them. If we continue to trend and enforce people to have electricity as all of their appliances and in their homes, we are going to overload this system quickly. We're at the point right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, last year we were at a base load issue in January, and before that in July or August when there was really bad heat, and again this past July or January when there was really bad cold, because we can't produce enough energy to keep up. So we are at a point of brownout, blackout because of that. So I think we need to balance that, where we want to go in clean energy and where we need to be to keep our residents safe.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Brixey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions. One is a follow-up on something you said that I'm confused on. So you said that in Ann Arbor, people who were building homes could not put in gas stoves.
They were not allowed in the ordinance proposed. They were not going to be allowed to even
You
connect.
said they weren't allowed to put it in while they were considering the ordinance. So did they put a ban,
didn't-
an emergency ban
Came
on?
out that way. What I was trying to point
Representative,
out was if the
You have a question,
ordinance
don't
was-
impugn. Like, he didn't say
I'm
that.
just-
Yeah.
I know.
If the ordinance was
Giving you a lot of
enacted,
lenience
they
here.
never would have been able to use natural gas appliances.
Okay, so they were allowed to do that while they were considering the ordinance. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. So, the choices that people make, I think something that I value also, I value choice a lot. and the choices that local communities make can reflect the different communities that we have. We have very diverse communities here in Michigan. So when I'm thinking through the details, the devil is always in the details of the bills that we try to enact. And I wonder, would this bill prohibit a local ordinance? Here in my county, we have a farmland preservation ordinance. And so would that prohibit Ingham County from preventing natural gas infrastructure from being put on farmland?
I don't understand where you're trying to arrive at.
Gas infrastructure.
Yeah.
Would your bill prevent a local ordinance that is preserving farmland? Would it prevent that and allow gas infrastructure to be put into farmland under the Farmland Preservation Act in Ingham County?
This bill has nothing to do with gas infrastructure. Nothing. It has to do with appliances. And a choice of being able to use gas versus electric as a user. It has nothing to do with infrastructure.
Chair recognizes Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. I know you just said this has nothing to do with infrastructure, but if a municipality, under the existing framework, were to say no gas, do you think that has an impact on infrastructure build out within that municipality? And sort of a secondary question on top of that. I don't know where federal preemption begins and state control in this issue ends necessarily, but wondering if there's any impact from a municipality putting an ordinance into effect that could disrupt the run of infrastructure as it exists, kind of forcing things to go around municipalities and that sort of thing.
I think that would be a question better served to the gas providers, but if you're going to lose customers, I think you have to look at it from a business standpoint of how much can you put into maintaining and improving a gas situation. And then again, you're ultimately forcing people that have electric or gas now. Let's say they did. They said, we're just going to shut that down. What you're essentially going to do is say to every homeowner, you have to convert your gas home to electric. So now if you have a gas dryer, washer or dryer, you got to put in a new electric feed to it. You may have to upgrade your electrical service. If you have a gas stove, same thing. So there's thousands of dollars you're going to push on to homeowners by this if utilities said, hey, we're just going to go away and we're just going to shut it off. We're not going to serve this community anymore. So effectively, you could do that with bad legislation, bad policy. It's looking at those unintended consequences, and I don't know what all those are if you don't allow choice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Rep. Schmaltz. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Giving you a new name.
Thank you, Chair Wenzel. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. I think it's pretty simple, and we're getting in the weeds here about something that's pretty simple. Once you start telling people what appliances they can have and what kind of appliances in their house, I think it's really overstepping our authority. So it's a very simple bill. If you want a gas stove, if you want an electric stove, you should be able to have either. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Okay, we've got some cards to read in. Stephanie Johnson does not wish to speak, supports the bill with UWUA. Not wishing to speak, supports the bill, Don Crandall, Home Builders Association of Michigan. Not wishing to speak, supports the bill, Tony Duchesne's TC Energy. And supports the bill, not wishing to speak, Tim Longholtz, NFIB. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Samantha Gibson, Michigan Association of Counties. Not wishing to speak, opposes the bill, Joanne Wisely, Michigan Township Association. Not wishing to speak, opposes the bill, Carly Knott, Michigan Environmental Council. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Tim Minota's Sierra Club. And not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Courtney Brady, Evergreen Action. And then we also have two that we missed to read in on Representative Green's Bill 4361, Not Wishing to Speak supports the bill. Tony Macesso, ITC, and Not Wishing to Speak supports the bill. Chris Inuzzi, Consumers Energy. All right, now moving on, we have a presentation from Jason Hayes and the Mackinac Center. Come on up, but before you begin, I want to center our focus a little bit after those two bills. This committee has a responsibility to ensure Michigan energy policy is really grounded in reality. As we continue to evaluate Michigan's energy future, this committee must be clear-eyed about the risks we potentially face as we continue down the path of politically driven energy mandates here in the state. Just a few days ago, MISO ordered emergency rolling blackouts across southeast Louisiana. With only a 3-minute notice, utilities were forced to shut off power to more than 100,000 customers. And why? Because the grid couldn't keep up with rising demand during a period of intense heat that we sometimes experience here in Michigan as well. The warning is clear: when generation supply can't meet demand, reliability fails, and it fails fast. This isn't a theoretical problem. It's happening right now all across the country and definitely in our state. And it's going to get worse if we pursue aggressive net zero policies without the firm generation to back this up. With that, I would like to welcome Jason. Start whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Wenzel, Chair Wenzel, and the other members of the committee. Appreciate you for allowing me to speak on this topic, the dangers or the costs of net zero for the state of Michigan. And I was told this would advance the slides. Does not appear to be doing so. I'll try this. No. Oh, there we go. It just needed to be selected. So what I'm going to go through here quickly is what is net zero? What does it look like in real life? Is clean energy really clean? Is it really just? We keep hearing about these terms, clean and just. What is the cost of net zero? We're preparing a study. Will be published in a few weeks. You guys are getting kind of a preview of the findings of this study. We'll look at our two scenarios that we ran, the wind solar battery scenario and the lower cost decarbonization scenario. And then we'll conclude with push to balance environment and economics. So what is it that net zero is trying to accomplish? It's basically, as I'm sure many of you know, driven by Governor Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan, which commits the state to 100% economy-wide net zero carbon neutrality by 2050. It also, as many of you voted on this bill, Public Act 235 of 2023, requires that the state gets 60% of its electricity supply from, in quotes, renewable sources by 2035 and 100% clean sources by 2040. Now, it does allow in those clean sources the nuclear and also natural gas with carbon capture and storage. One aspect of that carbon capture and storage thing is that while across the planet there have been several CCS systems designed to achieve 90% carbon capture, none of them have actually done it yet. So on a consistent, ongoing basis, they have not accomplished that 90% carbon capture. So by 2040, if the system doesn't, or if that technology does not improve, we're going to have trouble meeting that goal. So what does net zero look like in reality? If you look to the people whose job it is to manage and maintain our grid, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO for short, Todd Ramey, who's one of the senior vice presidents at MISO, testified before a federal House Energy Committee hearing about a year and a half ago, and he explained that controllable dispatchable resources, which by that he means coal, natural gas, and to some extent nuclear, are being retired and replaced primarily with weather-dependent, non-dispatchable, and variable generation sources. By that, he means primarily wind and solar. And those variable generation types we're doing that to achieve carbon reduction goals. But he goes on to add that weather-dependent generators are increasing reliability risks. We just heard Chair Wenzel explain one example of those risks. In our study, we also quoted several others. There's quotes from FERC commissioners, the Federal Energy Reliability Commission. There's quotes from NERC employees, the National Electric Reliability Corporation, sorry. They also explained those same sorts of shortages and problems. So another one, Todd Ramey's boss, John Baer, the CEO of MISO, explained in a publication that MISO put out early last year, where they said, Baer explained that the transition that's underway to get to a decarbonized end state is posing material adverse challenges to electric reliability. So we're hearing it from MISO, we're hearing it from other RTOs and ISOs, the grid operators, regional grid operators in PGM, we're hearing it in New England ISO, we're hearing it in ERCOT, the Southwest Power Pool, we're hearing several of them all say this exact same thing. And so we're seeing it also in real life start to play out. So last year we saw examples in the island of Oahu. They had a rolling blackout because there was insufficient solar and wind to supply the needs that they had. We saw just last year in ERCOT, which is Texas, do an emergency management order in January because they had more cold weather similar to what they had in February 2021. This time they were able to get through without a blackout. See the same thing in Alberta. This is the province of Alberta. During the real cold weather last year, they put out a note that said, look, we're having an emergency management situation. We also heard, as Rep. Wenzel just said, there was a power outage in Spain. They're not 100% sure yet. They're still investigating, but what it appears caused that outage was an extremely heavy reliance on solar with no grid or mechanical inertia to dampen swings in the frequencies. We just heard how the power went out for over 100,000 people in New Orleans for several hours about a week ago. And so all of these stories are building as we do more and more of the transition to decarbonize. But we're also hearing from academics and others that reliability risks aren't a fault of net zero, they're a feature of it. So we heard one academic from Rutgers University, David McDermott Hughes, who said that to save the climate, we're going to have to give up, as North Americans, our demand for a constant supply of electricity. And Hughes, in his article, said that we should actually model our grid, the North American grid, after Zimbabwe's grid, and after the post-Hurricane Maria Puerto Rico's grid, where the power went out. And he said that's a good thing. We should be willing to do that because by abiding an interlude, load shedding, where we go through blackouts, then we're going to, solve the climate problem. Okay, we're also hearing from other groups like the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy that we need to use wind and solar to decarbonize. But if we're going to do that, our businesses that expect to run 24/7, the companies that have 3 8-hour shifts, they're going to have to learn to accommodate the effects of weather when we do that. So those 3 8-hour shifts, well, we may not be able to do that. So what we should stop and think, what would that do to the productivity of our businesses and working, that sort of thing. And so I'll wrap up this little section here by asking or pointing out this quote from a book called The Unpopular Truth by Dr. Lars Chernow and Professor William Hayden Smith, where they said, electricity is to modern civilization what blood is to the human body. So when we start thinking about terms like, well, we should accept pauseful electricity, then, okay, put that in terms of this quote. Should we accept just not having blood in our body for a few hours? It seems nonsensical, right? Well, that electricity, that consistent supply of electricity is what we need to ensure our economy and our country really continues operating. So I'll move on to consider this idea that we're building clean energy. And I'll ask, when we are putting these sources in place, is this stuff really clean? And is it really just? And I know that you guys have heard from other groups and other, the utilities and that sort of thing, explain the challenges, the environmental impacts of using fossil fuels and nuclear and that sort of thing. So I'm not here to rehash that. You guys have already heard this. But what I want you to know is that there are environmental issues and social justice issues concerned with all forms of energy, not just fossil fuels. So I'll ask the question, when you see pictures like this, do you really believe that wind is protecting the environment when it's killing millions of large raptors and birds and tens of millions of insects and that sort of thing? When you see other academics producing papers like this, Vaclav Smil, who's an emeritus prof at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, went through and he looked at what does it take to get a wind turbine operating. And he went from mining and refining the minerals, getting the petroleum out of the ground to make the epoxies and the fiberglass and all that sort of stuff, manufacturing the wind turbines, transporting the wind turbines, building them, putting them up on site, and then operating them. And he showed that from every single aspect of operating a wind turbine requires fossil fuels. You cannot have wind turbines without fossil fuels in today's world. So he said, when he asked that question, what do I see when I see a wind turbine? Smil said, wind turbines are the pure embodiments of fossil fuels. So it's really not realistic to think that we're going to phase out fossil fuels by going to wind and solar. Some other questions. As we're using batteries and solar panels and that sort of thing, remember that the places that we're getting those solar panels when they're manufactured and all that, they have very different environmental regulations than we do. So this sort of thing could never happen in North America, but it happens every single day in China. So if you Google Baotou, China, rare earth minerals, you will get pictures like this, where the refineries in China are legally allowed to dump toxic radioactive waste on the ground while they're refining those things in the purpose of producing solar panels and the batteries that we need for EVs and the magnets that we need for wind turbines and that sort of thing. Same sort of thing. If we're going to use these batteries that we want for EVs and utility scale storage, remember that using current technologies, the chemistries of the batteries that we're using require cobalt. Well, 60 to 70% of the world's supply of cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And books like this, Cobalt Red, describe how a significant portion of that cobalt mineral comes from what are called artisanal mines that use 7-year-old kids to do the labor. So is that just? Is it equitable when we're using these sources? Even the New York Times admits and writes about the fact that in the Xinjiang region of China, solar companies use what's called forced labor, also known as slavery, with the Uyghur minority. So those are the solar panels that we're buying and installing in North America today. They're produced by slaves. So we have that aspect of the issue. The next aspect is what we look at in our publication that's coming out here in late June. We worked with a group called Always On Energy Research to do the modeling for this. And what they found is this bold portion in my text, that there is no inexpensive way to meet the CO2 emission reduction targets that Michigan officials have written into legislation. We cannot do it on the cheap. It will be expensive. And so what we did is we ran two scenarios. We looked at the initial requirements of the first versions of the 2023 energy bills, Senate Bill 271 and House Bill 4759, if I remember my numbers correctly. They required 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035, replace all carbon-emitting energy sources with wind, solar, and battery, basically was what they wanted. That's what our modeling scenario looks at. It did maintain existing nuclear capacity, so we left that in our study. Our other scenario was the lower cost decarbonization scenario. We used carbon capture on existing coal plants, like the Monroe plant and the Campbell plant, and also the Blue Water Energy Center, which is natural gas, and the Zealand gas plant. So use carbon capture. And while those plants are living out their intended lives out to 2040 and beyond, we use that time to build nuclear plants, small modular nukes and APR 1400s, the big baseload plants. We also included limited battery storage in that, just to even up and make sure there was enough capacity. So why did we do multiple scenarios? Well, it deals with the uncertainty. We've passed bills like House Bill 235, and we still don't know exactly how that's going to come out on the ground. So we've got uncertainty, we're recognizing that, and then allowing for trade-offs and trying to enhance flexibility. What are the other options we can use? And then by doing that, we let people like you in this committee make better decisions on policy. So we're going from the electricity that we had in 2022, which was about 2/3 fossil, about 1/4 nuclear, and about 10 to 15% renewables. And then scenario one, we complete the timeline by 2035, we retire all CO2 emitting generation source, we build new capacity, primarily wind, solar, and battery. The costs for that, according to our modeling run, was going to be $360 billion through 2050. Again, there's no cheap way to do this. But the challenge or the punchline at the end of that slide is that there were multiple capacity shortfalls. So again, think New Orleans, think Spain, that I already talked about. At the end of our modeling run, this is what the scenario, the easiest and most economic, affordable way to make the wind, solar, and battery scenario work. It was 50% wind, 25% basically solar, and about 22% nuclear. That's a cost breakdown. Again, all of this will be in the report that's coming out soon. The majority of those costs were related to construction, taxes, and utility profits. This is the part that was most disturbing about our modeling run, which is if you look at the red spots, our model kicked out as much as 61 contiguous hours of capacity shortfalls and said people in Michigan could be sitting in the dark for as long as 61 hours continuously in January. So moving on to our second scenario, the low-cost decarbonization. This was our other option. Was there a different way to do net zero? So again, the timeline ends by 2040. We retire or retrofit existing CO2 emitting sources, and we replace them with like carbon capture on the big coal plants and the gas plants. We build new nuclear, small modular reactors, and APR 1400s. The cost for that was basically about half of the previous option, which is $206 billion. And there were no capacity shortfalls. So that's what it looks like. Again, mostly nuclear, about 20% fossil fuels with carbon capture, 80% approximately nuclear. And the reason that we did this, the short version of this slide, is that by extending the lives of existing plants, we reduce costs. We give time for the utilities to build the nuclear plants that we're recommending they build. That's the cost breakdown, and that's a much happier slide, which shows that there's no shortages, no blackouts associated with the second option, the low-cost decarbonization. For the average utility customer, there is also a big difference in costs because this, for the WSB option, essentially, on average, over the study period, everyone's bill would go up $230. For the LCD option, everyone's bill would go up about $125. At the end of that, they both essentially achieved the same thing in terms of carbon dioxide reduction. The WSB reduces by 57 million tons annually. The low-cost decarbonization is 55 million. At the end of that, we recognize that there's still no measurable impact on future global temperatures when Michigan goes to zero. Essentially 0.0015 degrees Celsius changed. So wrapping up, the conclusion is we should choose to mitigate the damage done by net zero. We should choose the less expensive option that does not cause reliability issues. So consider the economic impacts, look to markets to develop better technologies, and then prioritize energy security. Any generation changes made by our utilities should maintain or improve the adequacy of our existing electric grid, not damage it, not take us toward the things that are happening in New Orleans, in Spain, in those other areas. And I'll close with this. I saw this comment on a Substack this weekend that a dark children's hospital is far more problematic than an operating coal-fired power station. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative Brixey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming and giving us your presentation today. We're hearing a lot about choice this morning, and I'm definitely pro-choice and proud. I'm wondering, does the Mackinac Center think that energy companies should be allowed to make their own choices about what type of power they're generating and that they think is good to generate?
Yes, and part of the challenge that, like, I know where you're going with this, part of the challenge is that those companies are getting improper incentives in the form of the production tax credit, the investment tax credit. They're paid by the taxpayer to invest in energy choices that damage reliability and raise prices. So the other aspect of these companies that you're talking about, the monopoly utilities that exist and operate in Michigan and around the country today, they're basically government-protected monopolies. Nobody is allowed to compete with them. So to some extent, recognizing that fact, it is your job to step in and say, okay, since nobody's allowed to compete with you and offer other options, then yeah, in the current system, the government has to step in and moderate or govern what they're doing.
Wait, so we should be involved in regulating and making the choices for the energy companies then? Is that what you're saying?
I would like to have a free, open, free market competition. But
We don't have that anywhere.
Right. You're making my point for me.
Well, but I thought the point that I get from your presentation is that you want SMRs and nuclear energy, which I agree is much cleaner than oil or coal. But and we've had tax credit requests for that type of technology as well, and it's not really quite at the point of being there yet. So what I'm getting at is that the true cost of oil, think about the BP spill and think about the Valdez spill and the millions and millions of fish and beaches that were ruined and birds, all the pictures of the birds, the seabirds that were covered in oil and drowned and dead. It seems like if the energy companies are moving towards renewables, that's sort of their choice, and seems like they probably are not just factoring in that they're probably factoring in liability costs, because it's expensive when you have environmental contamination caused by something that everyone uses. It's very expensive.
Sure. So those costs are factored in, absolutely. But by the same token, what I said previously still applies, that through things like market disrupting subsidies and that sort of thing, and I would argue we should get rid of subsidies for any and all energy.
So you don't think we should be subsidizing SMRs?
No.
Okay, that's good to know.
Chair recognizes Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. A brief setup question, which I promise isn't a gotcha question before I get to my point. So simple yes or no on this. Do you believe climate change is real? And the second yes or no question, do you believe it's a threat to humanity, civilization, anything like that?
So I've published a lot on this. Climate change is real. It is happening, sure. The next question, is it the existential threat that we've been told? Even the IPCC does not say that it's an existential threat, that it's going to end the human race, as AOC and others have said, that the world's going to end in 10 years. No, what the IPCC, if you read the science studies, say is that by 2100, if the absolute worst case scenarios, RCP 8.5 as an example, happen, and we stopped all climate mitigation, and just instead of doing any sort of clean energy efficiency, anything like that, we shut it all down and increased around the world our use of coal by 500, 700%. Then in that instance, the impacts would be things like, instead of having, I believe the number's 250% GDP growth by the year 2100, we would have about 247% GDP growth by the year 2100. So yes, it'll have an impact. Yes, it would be in some ways negative, but at the same time, it's not like a comet hitting the planet.
I don't disagree that it's as bad as a comet hitting the Earth, but I do think that the impacts we're seeing right now are already showing a potentially very severe impact on the way we are used to existing, at the very least. I'm not saying civilization is going to be wiped out, but very difficult to enjoy the standards of living that we have if things continue as they are. The reason I asked that question as a setup is because it's very hard for us to find common ground on why it's important to shift in this direction if we don't agree that climate change is a reality and that the impacts are going to be severe. And I want to say that I agree with elements of what you're talking about here as far as, like, cost being very important. I've said for a long time we can't fight climate change if we put too much of a cost burden or there's rolling blackouts on society, because unfortunately we're not the society we used to be that's willing to bear burdens for a greater good. And so we have to make sure that impacts are light. But I think there is a middle ground, and I'm curious what you think about this, between your two proposals up there, one that keeps coal plants active and the one that is just purely solar, wind, and batteries. And I think our climate plan actually points to this middle ground a little bit here, because obviously solar has become the cheapest form of deployable electricity. I mean, there's a reason that Texas is building solar faster than they can produce it. But also, to your point, we need base load electricity. We need dispatchable electricity, something that nuclear is very good at. As you point out in your second scenario, SMRs, nuclear power. And we have gas with carbon capture, even if it doesn't quite get to 90%, as a good dispatchable option to help kind of bridge us into a nuclear, wind, solar sort of mix, maybe with some limited gas capacity left. But I think, and I don't see the reason why we would want to keep coal capacity. I understand that coal has been historically cheap, but we've also tapped out a good deal of the cheap coal that's accessible. And exposure to coal in the power plants is, one, more radioactive than a nuclear plant, which is a fun fact I always like to share. I've, cook in Palisades, and we always like to tell our communities, your exposure to radiation is less than if you live next to a coal plant. But the health impacts from coal are just remarkably bad. The mining, all of it is just really bad. And so I just interested in if why you don't see a middle ground between these two, where we continue to build out solar and wind while maintaining dispatchable gas for at least a period of time and building out the nuclear baseload, because I think that points us in a direction where we're eliminating a lot of the highest health risk and most climate impactful generation while still maintaining grid reliability and low cost. So
okay, I'll try. There's a lot there. So
I appreciate that.
I'll try to boil it down. You're concerned about climate change, correct? Yeah. Okay, so if I go back to these slides and say both scenarios achieve your end, don't they? They both go to net zero, essentially. One a little bit less, but effectively very similar. Okay, now the other one doesn't, it's not going to work here, doesn't do that. Now, I understand where this is why we modeled two different scenarios. Like I said, we have flexibility, we can do something in between. But the reality is, you brought up Texas as an example. Texas is building a lot of wind and solar. Just as I said in the previous question, they're doing that because the incentives are wrong. The federal subsidies for wind and solar are quite large. Texas, in the past few years, has had its price increase, electricity prices go up by something in the neighborhood of 28%. The more we use the unreliable and non-dispatchable, weather-dependent sources, the more we're going to see imposed costs. Because what you end up having to do, and this, I didn't have time in this presentation to go through the whole paper, but we go through and show how the levelized cost of wind and solar are much higher once you include the reality that you have to overbuild and then curtail wind and solar in order to meet basic reliability requirements. So you have to do that in order to make wind and solar work. You have to build a lot more. And then on a warm, like 70-degree sunny day, when the wind's blowing, they overproduce. That's why California has what's called the duck curve, because they overproduce and their net demand, once you minus out what solar needs, goes below the demand curve. And during the day, California is scrambling to get rid of the extra electricity that their solar produces. So they're having reliability problems, having to deal with that, because just the inherent nature of wind and solar does not fit well with the way our system is built. So the issues, like again, I'll keep going back to other slides here. What are the challenges that we're facing? Blackouts, unreliability. These are happening in systems that are exactly as you described. So Spain's system was about 70%, 60-ish% solar, 12-ish% wind, with small little bits of spinning reserve natural gas and nuclear. And because of what appears to be a lack of mechanical inertia, their system crashed and took the entire Iberian Peninsula out. So part of your question was, how can we continue to have the society that we're accustomed to and still address these challenges? Okay, that slide right there shows we do not have the society that we're accustomed to. When our system can go up and down like that, that's problematic. When we have groups saying things like this, well, business may not be able to run 3 8-hour shifts. What does that do to the people who work in those plants? Eventually, they're going to get laid off because you can't run three 8-hour shifts in a row. Okay, so again, back to your question, we're not designing a system that works with the society that we've grown accustomed to. We need to do something different, which is why at the end of my presentation I say we need to focus on reliability and affordability. We have the technology when we're doing that to make it very clean. That's why, again, go back to another slide here. When you look at emission issues, we're doing it with the LCD scenario. We're using carbon capture to address the climate concerns, Now, carbon capture is more expensive and all that sort of thing, I understand. But that Public Act 235 was passed. It's law. So we have to achieve this somehow. Do we want to do it with reliable, affordable electricity or not?
Thank you, Jason. So to wrap it up real quick, we've got one last question, a quick question from Rep. Preston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jason, for being here today. Just a quick question. Did you check out the summer planning resource auction and the advent of the new reliability-based demand curve? And what did you see regarding the 50% decrease in surplus capacity in the northern regions?
Yeah, so MISO's summer reserve capacity auction last year, it was $30 per megawatt day. This year, it's $666 per megawatt day. So what is that, about a 2,000% increase? Okay, that's showing, and MISO said this in their slides that explained the results of the auction, that's telling us we need to build reliable capacity now. They didn't mince words about it. A 2,000% increase in the prices that people around the region are going to pay because the utilities have to bid in and pay that cost. That's a significant increase. So for the average, think whatever it is, a rural citizen in one of your that you represent in your district, do they have that kind of money? They're going to be able to spend an extra $200-300 a month to be able to provide electricity for their house and to keep their family warm, to cook their food. The single mom in inner city Detroit, does she have that money to pay those extra bills? And I know we have things like MEAP and LIHEAP and that sort of thing. Okay, so if it's not the single mom in Detroit, then it's the stressed out soccer mom and dad who are trying to get their kids that are middle class and are able to pay their bills. Well, now they're paying more on top of their bills to cover the other costs. So yeah, it's a serious issue and it should be addressed.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. I have a motion from Rep. Frisbie to excuse absent members. Hearing no objections, absent members are excused. Seeing no further business before the committee, House Energy Committee stands adjourned.